Let's see. And we are live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this live show where we're going to be talking about the Liveship Traders trilogy by Robin Hobb. So today I'm joined by Derry and Sophia and Yolene, and Scott is going to join us. Alex is unfortunately not able to join us, even though he was advertised. So we're thinking about him. And we're going to be talking spoiler free at first, and then we're going to go into spoilers about this trilogy. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourselves and tell us how far you're into the Realm of the Elderlings, your just experience about it.
Hi, I'm Derry. My channel is Derry's Read It Before, which tells you pretty much all you need to know. I've read it before many times. I'm in the 20s of the first three trilogies, and it's decreased as it's gone along, as the books got published. So yeah, I'm here as kind of like, I have things to say about all of these things. That's my Realm of the Elderlings experience.
Perfect, thank you.
I'm Sophia from the channel Sophia's Thoughts, and this is my first journey through the Elderlings. So I've read the Farseer trilogy, and I've read the Liveship Traders trilogy, of course. And Joanna and I are buddy reading Tawny Man at the moment. I have finished Fool's Errand, and we're hoping, when is it? Next month or this month that we're reading the next one? Joanna can remind me.
When I get my ass in shape and finish Fool's Errands.
That. So yeah, very much a Elderlings newbie here.
Hey, Scott.
Sorry, I'm late.
Yay.
No problem. We're introducing ourselves.
Not that much.
And then just telling us, after Yolene, you can go ahead and introduce yourselves and tell us where you are at in your journey. And we're doing spoiler free first and then spoilers.
Okay.
Hi everyone, so I'm Yolene. I have a small booktube channel, Yolene Reads, and I am almost done with Realm of the Elderlings right now. So I am going to start the final book, which is called Assassin's Fate, I think. I am slightly nervous, slightly excited. I don't really know what to expect. But yeah, I think that this is going to be my favorite series of all time. I think it is going to push A Song of Ice and Fire to number 2. So, of course, I am extremely excited to talk about the series with you guys. It's been a while since I've read Liveship Traders, so please refresh my memory sometimes, but yeah, very excited.
Perfect.
My turn? All right. Hey, I'm Scott. I'm the Bald Booktuber. Yep. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I'm in a Barnes & Noble, so that's great.
How fitting.
Yeah. So I completed Realm of the Elderlings last year in December. Assassin's Fate is my favorite book since Storm of Swords 20 years ago. Yeah, I love the series. I am in the middle of a reread, so I'm about 70% into Ship of Magic currently, trying to refresh myself. And likewise, I will probably have forgotten some stuff, but hopefully we'll remember enough of the important things. Yeah, excited to talk Liveship. It's a fantastic series, and so excited to be here with all of you.
Perfect. Well, welcome everyone. I'm Joanna. This is my channel. If you're new here, this is also my first time through the Realm of the Elderlings. I read the Farseer trilogy, I think last year, and I took quite the break. And then I read Ship of Destiny, I think at the tail end of last year. Mad Ship, I buddy read with Sophia in February, and then I had this huge, massive reading slump. And we just finished Liveship last month, and I'm currently reading Fool's Errand. So,
excellent.
Yeah, I'm very excited. I'm thinking this is looking like a new favorite for me too. So,
yeah,
George has a run for his money right here. So.
Awesome, exactly.
Yeah,
cool. So,
because I never stop reading. Basically, I finish and then start again.
you just
so,
you know.
So I'm in. I just keep going. I'm about 2/3 through Ship of Destiny at the moment. So this is beautifully timed for where I'm at in the reread.
But these are perfect to just throw on as audiobooks, except for the Liveship, because the narrator was awful. Like,
well, that's something I wanted to ask: is out of people here, who has listened to the audio of this trilogy?
I have.
I think almost everybody.
Okay.
Yeah, Sophia visited me last weekend, and like right before we went,
really awful.
Yeah, right before we would go to sleep, she would be like, "Joanna, what? Althea!" And I was like, "Great, thanks, Sophia." So right before I would go to bed, I would hear just that, and I was like, "Thanks, thank you." Yeah, she
It's
was
really bad.
she was
I've
a
got to listen
choice.
to it really fast.
See, this is what we were saying. If
It's
it was
not
already
great.
felt long at 2.5 speed, her saying Althea. So imagine at 1 time speed. So-
Yeah.
No, yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
it's so bad.
Still there 5 years later.
So bad.
That's why the
It's
audiobook
like
is
a,
so long.
it's like a
PTSD.
football commentator. It says goal until the next score is gold.
Only
Yeah, like,
goal is
just
scored. You know what I mean?
slow motion.
Yeah.
It's so bad.
Yeah, which the Fool's Errand narrator is much, much better. I mean, the Tawny Man.
Yeah,
because it's the same for
Langton's
that.
awesome. He's one of
Yeah.
my favorite narrators. He's really good.
But do they change again after
Yeah.
for the other series?
Yeah, it goes back to Anne Flosnick.
They do.
Your favorite.
And
Goes
actually,
back
no,
to
it
the
goes to,
live ship narrator.
No,
No.
I was
it's
looking at that
okay,
the other day.
Joanna.
It's not. It's a different woman.
Yeah,
it's
there's
Anne
You have
Flosnick.
two
I
versions.
There's
is there
two
two
Oh, it's the
versions?
two
there's
versions.
two
I didn't know
versions.
that.
Oh, okay. Okay,
Yeah.
I didn't realize that.
Well, I have the
And-
version that's not her.
Oh, I'm not.
Oh,
I'm not going for that version.
I don't remember offhand.
Scribd has both versions, Joanna.
Okay, I'm not picking her again.
Oh, okay.
I'm done. I'm done with her
Me
voice.
And then it's Elliot Hill for the final series. He's not that good either, I don't think. But
Oh. Well.
So-
But by then you're pretty invested in it. Reading it physically with your eyeballs is fine because you can just zoom through it.
Yeah.
I do everything immersively, even if I don't like the narrator. So I still go through and listen to Flosnick. I'm listening to her again while I read.
Yeah.
So even though she's not my favorite.
I will do the same.
Bet
Anyway,
so
so.
am I. Yeah.
Cool. So compared to the other, I mean, I think everyone says that The Fits and the Fool is the best trilogy, but since Sophia and I haven't read it, compared to Farseer, how would you say, which one is your favorite? Liveship or Farseer?
Of the first two?
Yeah.
Yeah, the live ship is much, much better than Farseer, even though I adore Farseer.
Okay.
Live ship is just a masterpiece. I think Farseer has some issues with pacing and some other stuff, and I never felt that in live ship.
I know that this is an unpopular
Liveship's
opinion, but I love
I think
Farseer
the
more.
technically strongest
Yeah.
trilogy.
Okay, so pretty
I love
divided.
Farseer more, but that's purely because I've read the later books and they strengthen that
It's true.
experience. All of that later input just really enriches Farseer. So until you read that, Farseer is always a weaker trilogy. But Live Ships, just on its own, is really strong. So, yeah.
So I think I have the unpopular opinion that I actually like Farseer better, even though I haven't read the other stuff yet. I don't know what it was about Farseer, and lots of people don't like Assassin's Quest either, and that's my
No.
favourite of the Farseer trilogy. So I think I'm just a bit odd, which, you know, sums up my life pretty much, so it's fine.
No.
It hits
The
everybody
most
differently.
right.
That's perfectly fine.
Yeah, I think that I can see that Liveship Traders is the better fantasy trilogy, but I'm just in love with Fitz. So
Yep.
I can see that that first trilogy has some errors, but especially coming of age, it's my type of thing. So yeah, I'm biased.
Yeah, I agree.
Nothing wrong with that.
And I agree with the comment that characters and character actions are the best in Farseer because I'm so attached to Night Eyes, to be honest. Every second that Night Eyes appears in Fool's Errand, I have tears in my eyes. I'm like, I love you and I don't want anything bad to happen to you, but I don't trust Robin Hobb, so I know I'm gonna be in pain eventually. So I mean, a royal assassin was a rough ride. So
That's a
Yeah.
fair call.
But I did love Liveship. I think what I
It
loved about
was.
Liveship is
Yeah,
what she was
fair
saying is the
call.
world building. It's just so good. Even because you start the trilogy off so freaking confused about what are these serpents? What is happening? Like I am so
Yeah.
confused. And then you end the trilogy where you end it, and it's just amazing. 3 books. I mean, it's great.
Yeah.
There you go. See, Sophia,
It
you're not
ties
alone.
together just so beautifully. It's
I like Assassin's
really
Quest
is
a lot
just-
too. It's a good book.
beautiful. And Assassin's Quest, yeah. It's I would be happy if it was twice as long again. I'm just that happy to hang out with these characters.
Yeah.
Some people are, nothing is happening. And yeah.
Don't talk to me.
They're wrong.
Anytime Fitz and Night Eyes are on the page together, I'm good. So that
Yeah,
I
happens
know,
pretty
I
fast and
agree.
fast.
I love
And
them.
the Fool.
And the
Yeah.
Fool.
Fool's my favorite character in the whole story. So
Yeah.
I'm with you.
So, in a another non-spoiler question I have for you, would you, if someone wants to start Realm of the Elderlings, I've heard you can start with Farseer or that you could start with Live Ships. I personally think you'd need to start with Farseer, but I think Scott, you did it the other way around.
No, Chris Bookish Cauldron did. I'm
It
the
was Chris,
publication
yeah.
order always guy. I don't ever read
Yeah.
things out of order. And I would never tell anyone to read it out of order.
Yeah.
So,
Okay. Gary, what about you?
No. Well, I'm a very firmly, because I'm not quite as read and publish order to the same extent that Scott is, but I read Discworld. It's hard to be that hardcore about it.
I suppose, yeah.
But Live Ships is, it's seen, for people who haven't read beyond Live Ships, I can see how people would be like, well, why can't you just start here? And there are reasons.
Yeah.
And basically, if you start with Live Ships, the premise of Live Ships explains things that are still unknown in Farseer. So if you go into Farseer with that knowledge, a lot of things that happen in Farseer are very confusing. Like, why are they even doing this? And I think that forms a barrier between forming the connections you kind of need to with those characters. And so it's just not the best way to enjoy the series. I'm not the book police. If people read Live Ships first, hey, they read Live Ships and it's fabulous and they enjoyed it probably. I love this series so much. I want people to have the best experience. And to do that, you need to get the information in the right order. So, yeah, read Farseer first.
Also, we'll get to it probably in the spoiler section, but my favorite reveal in fiction has no weight whatsoever if you do it out of order. So.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, Ben, I get this, but people not wanting to read the Fitz books makes me sad because I love Fitz. So.
It does make sense. Ben is right. A lot of people look at it and go, oh, people tell me it's depressing. People tell me it's slow. And I really would rather push them into reading Farseer, and only if they really resist. Like, no, I'm not going to read it. Am I going to say, okay, fine, read Live Ship, but you have to go back and read Farseer if you want to, because if you haven't read Farseer, so much of what Fitz does just isn't going to make sense to you. You need to know what he is. So.
Yeah, I feel like Live Ships isn't not depressing either. Like, maybe not quite as much as Farseer, but still pretty depressing in places. And I won't say what because we're still spoiler free. But yeah, it's not depressing.
And pretty.
Yeah.
We got Yolene back. There she is.
We did.
Well, test. Can you hear
Yes,
me? Am I
we can.
angry robot or normal?
Not angry robot.
No, angry robot.
Perfect. That's a relief.
Good.
So what about your thoughts, Yolene, on Farseer versus Live Ships versus where you should start?
I think that for Farseer or Live Ship, it doesn't really matter that much, because even though you will get spoiled for a couple of things that happen in Farseer if you start with Live Ship, I don't think that you would realize that if you start with Live Ship. And you can then still start with Farseer and not really be spoiled. But it's better to read chronologically, so why not give Farseer a chance? And if you dislike it, I would still give Liveship Traders a chance, because it's so different, and I do know that not everybody likes the slow pacing of the Fitz books. So then still try Liveship Traders. I think that that's the type of fantasy series that everybody would love. So why not? But give Farseer a chance, and then read them chronologically. That's the easiest way. And that way you're certain that you won't get spoiled or you won't catch on things that you shouldn't.
Nice. Okay, is there something else you guys want to say spoiler free before we just go for it? Just read Robin Hobb. I mean, if you're here, you probably have, but if you haven't, this is your friendly neighborhood push to do it. So
Yes.
Okay, cool. So I think we can go into spoilers now. So if you haven't read Liveship, goodbye. Come back when you have, and join us. And don't deprive yourself of an amazing trilogy. And then you can just talk with us in the comments later. So,
Mhm.
spoilers, full spoilers. We can go. I was telling you earlier. We can do characters and or groupings of characters, and we can go through the series in general.
Okay.
So, where do you want to start? Do you want to start with your reveal, Scott, that you were talking about?
Yeah. So I'm not a very careful reader, I guess, and I hadn't put together that the Amber was the fool until the moment that she redid the masthead on Paragon and gave him Fitz's face and had the axe. And that chapter is probably a top 5 chapter in fiction for me. I could just
Yeah.
read that chapter over and over again. Yeah, that just hits super hard for me every time, and I can't wait to get back to Ship of Destiny to hit it again. But yeah, that's my favorite reveal in fiction is Amber's the Fool. So
Yeah.
and it won't mean anything at all to people that don't read Farseer first. So that's why I say
That's
don't
true.
skip it.
Yeah.
Mhm. I didn't even catch up on that.
I
It's
didn't.
until a later point I realized that, like, oh, so now that I'm going to reread, I will probably, well, hopefully, I will read that chapter with a new
Yeah.
set of eyes. But I didn't realize that.
No, neither
I
did
knew it. I knew it going in, and so
It is.
in Matchship, I
I
think
can't
it's in
hear anybody.
Matchship.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
I can
Yeah.
hear you.
I can't hear anybody else.
Yep, we can.
Oh
hear you.
no.
I'm gonna jump out and jump back in.
Okay. Oh.
Now we can't.
What was I gonna say? Yeah, I knew going in, and so I think it's in Matchship, or in the first one, Ship of Magic. I'm not sure, but Amber's talking to someone, and someone's like, "Oh, you would have to be a fool to blah blah blah," and she's like, "Oh, I've been called a fool once or twice before," and I was like, "Yes, yes, there we go. It's beautiful."
Yeah.
So,
There's a line in one of them where someone is describing Amber and they believe that she's sympathetic to the slavery trade because she wears a slaver's freedom earring, which of course Fitz has got from
Right.
from patients that Burke had given his father, but when it's being described, they say that Amber had told this person that the love of her life gave it to her, and every time I read, oh, it's so beautiful, it's gorgeous.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think what you said, Scott, though, is my
But
favorite
there are
thing.
people
when
who
she...
read all the way through and don't get it until
It's true.
they get the reveal in Tawny Man.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, I think the moment for me that was really emotional was when Paragon said, "Give me a face of someone you could love," and then it's Fitz, and I'm like, "We're good."
Mhm.
And then on the flip side, when I started Fool's Errand, and they're talking about like "You're one love," and I'm like, "Ah, yes, I'm good. I'm home." The pain starts like 20 pages in. So yeah, I love that. I love that. I think if you don't know going in, or if you don't look for it, it could be a bit more difficult to pick up on because they're not described the same or anything. So
Well, and
It's-
I didn't notice it at all because I'm not a visual reader. I don't see pictures
Same.
in my head when I read. So it wasn't until you told me, Joanna, that she carved Paragon's face into Fitz that I was like, oh, okay. Well, I would never have known that if somebody hadn't told me because my brain just does not work that way. I had no idea, none at
Yeah,
all, that
same
that's
here.
what had happened.
yeah, I sent her the picture of the cover where Fitz looks like with his braid and stuff and the axe. I was like, "This is what I pictured when they said that." So
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Yeah, I think the Fool/Amber is definitely one of the most interesting characters ever written. I know that a lot of people say that that's their favorite. Now, for me, it still Fitz, but I can see that Fitz is, well, other authors could have written Fitz.
Mhm.
Hobb is just incredible in character work. But the Fool, I think that nobody could have written him or them the way that Robin Hobb has done.
I agree with that. Yeah.
I mean, aren't they like an inspiration for Hoyt in?
I was
Cosmere,
literally
so,
just going to
yeah.
say that the Fool is
Yeah.
basically Hoyd, right? Like,
Yeah,
Yeah, Sanderson has specifically said that was his inspiration for Wit/Hoyd. So, yeah.
There we go.
Which is a character I also really like, but it's a bit of a knockoff, but that's okay. I
Yeah,
find it a bit
I
of
mean,
a knockoff.
well,
Fool.
yeah, I mean, Hoyd is a very different personality
Mhm.
though. Like,
Yeah.
the Fool is just so sweet. I don't think anyone would ever
Oh.
accuse Hoyd of being sweet.
No, no, never. And I'm wondering. I think I'll wait until Scott is back to ask my question. But I was wondering, maybe because you do see some parallels if you've read A Song of Ice and Fire, especially, for example, the end
yeah.
of Royal Assassin and beginning of Assassin's Quest. You see some parallels to A Song of Ice and Fire, or rather, you see some parallels to Realm of the Elderlings in The Song of Ice and Fire. And so I was wondering, is there like a full type character in The Song of Ice and Fire that I'm just not thinking of? So I'm thinking the only person that comes to my mind is Mushroom, but I'm like, this is not. No. So
No.
I'm not thinking of anyone else. So the Fool's pretty unique. So
There
it's what
are
you were
other
saying. No one else can write the
similarities
Fool. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so going into, I guess since we are with Amber / the Fool, we can go with Althea, Brashen, and all of them first, and then we can go to Malta and all of them, and then we can go because I kind of want to start with Malta because talk about. There we go. That's how our dear narrator says it. But Malta is one of those characters where you start Ship of Magic, and you're like, I hate you. You're so annoying.
Yes.
I just hope you die at some point. And then you end the trilogy, and you're like, I love you. You're great.
Oh, she's the
So-
ultimate brat. Mm.
Oh yeah,
Yes.
She's awful.
she's
Extremely
awful.
annoying.
In the first book, I was just like, every time she was on
really
page,
is
I thought
painful.
exactly.
Yeah,
Mhm.
awful. But I was saying to Joanna when we were reading it, like, it's just so clever of Hobb to put Malta with the satrap, because the satrap is just so detestable that you start to like Malta, even though
Oh.
literally at the very end of the last book you still thought that
Yeah.
she was awful. So it's just really, really well done.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It covers
reminds me a
very
lot
well
of,
for what I think is the moment that she grows. Sorry, Scott. And that
No, you're good. Go ahead.
she's literally just finished being drowned in the memories with the dragon. So she has just spent however many hours completely overwhelmed with other personalities and other knowledge and other experiences. And she's still integrating that into herself. But we don't recognize that because then she ends up and she's having to step up. But because she's just had that experience, she's drawing on things that she didn't have in her before. So she takes what a lot of people go, oh, she changes too fast for me. Like, yes, but she had that really transformative experience just before she meets Cosco and Kiki. So the two events together really drive that shift in her personality, where she suddenly realizes the scale of events around her. I'm going to have to refresh again. I do apologize for the internet in New Zealand.
No, that's okay. Don't worry. Scott, you were going to say something about Malta.
No, I was just going to say she reminds me a lot of Sansa's arc, obviously, in Song of Ice and Fire.
Yes.
And their worlds are like so small in the sense that they're used to getting everything they want. They're used to everyone bending their will to them, that empathy is something they have to develop over time because they don't understand that other people live in the world besides them. Which, you know, so that just has to develop. So for me, those are two characters that I always kind of see under the same lens. I never say I hate either of them, but they're really rough for me to read early on in the first book of both series, and both series that I've read multiple times. So that's just kind of how I see those types of characters.
You're right. You're
agree.
very right about the similarities between them. Go, you can go for it. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say that they are incredibly annoying, but like said before, they are also a product of their environment, so you can't really blame them. It's actually their elders who should have done a better job. And because every time they do something like that, which is frowned upon, they get the result that they want. So of course, that is going to be enforced every time. And I think that Malta's arc is just incredibly gratifying as well, because you see how she grows from other experiences. When she's taken away from everything that she knows, she could have become even a worse version of what she was. but
Yep.
she actually got better. And I think that what Sophia also said, then she's with the satrap and she sees how pampered he is and how spoiled. But that was her just
Mhm.
Mhm.
a couple of months before. So it's nice to see that difference between the two.
And I love that she learns to, she doesn't, what you were saying there, she doesn't really change as much, in my opinion, as much as she learns to use all her skills and talents, which she was using to be annoying, and now she uses them to be smart. Like, she was always very good at manipulating, and now she's like, okay, I'm gonna use this, but in a different way, not to get
Mhm.
what's best for Malta, but what's best for my family or whatever.
Yes.
And I think that's why I love the way
Yeah, I
Robin
apologize for
Hobb
my
writes
delay. My
characters.
internet is awful. Yeah,
Go for it.
it's I've always said she's too clever for what her life had in before everything happens. She had no outlet for that intelligence. She wasn't being
Mhm.
educated, she wasn't being challenged, and so it
Right.
turns to petty uses. So when she is challenged, she has the ability to step up and do more. And I think she finds a lot of strength in herself in finding that she can do things, that she can figure stuff out, that she can make these connections and go, huh, okay, if I behave this way, then he's going to act that way, and that's going to change how that person reacts. And as soon as she starts to think along those lines, you see the adult that she's going to become, where she's going to be thinking about consequences. And she's going to be thinking about what she actually wants as an outcome from a situation. And I love that for her. I love it so much.
Yep.
Yeah.
Good points.
It's actually very Yasna, that, isn't it? Sorry, I know I keep mentioning Sanderson, but it is.
I do love
That a
Yasna.
little
That's a
bit.
great character in Stormlight.
Yeah.
Yep.
So before we continue on with either Malta or the other characters, here's a good question. Who is your favorite character in the Liveship Traders?
Favorite
Paragon.
as in most interesting, or
Hmm.
It's a good question.
Yeah.
If I had to pick for just the series itself, I would probably say Wintro. Not favorite in the sense that I like everything that he does, because I really, really dislike a lot of things that happen in Ship of Destiny. But his arc and his kind of journey from being a disciple of Saw and these kinds of things, I like that entire arc. So
I love
he's
that.
probably my favorite to follow throughout the story.
Yeah.
I think mine is probably Paragon,
Mhm.
because I think he's potentially the most interesting. Although this might be a bit unpopular, but in the first book, I think my favorite was probably Kenneth.
Mhm.
yeah, same.
Yeah.
I don't think that's that unpopular.
Yeah, I think people like Kenneth, yeah. Until the end, people like, yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really liked Kenneth, and I think
Kenneth is,
even
we could do a whole stream on Kenneth. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
yes, and even until the end, I enjoyed his arc. Like, he did horrible things, and even though you are with him so close, you could have seen the signs. I think if I reread the books,
Mhm.
Kenneth was an idiot from the start, and you could see that he was going to be a psychopath. But you want to see him evolve, and you
Yeah.
almost want to believe that he's going to have like a positive
Yeah.
arc
Right.
until he does something that is completely unredeemable. But
yes,
it's
my first time through your live ships was exactly that. He was unredeemable, and you're like, no, I felt so betrayed as a reader, because I felt like he'd been set up for a redemption arc. And then I was like, I was like, no. And I was heartbroken. But on reread, you really see how clearly she's telling you, no, he has the opportunities to change, and he never takes them.
Never takes them.
And with
Mhm.
context later, you see why, and you're like, okay, that's actually genius. But yeah, I felt so betrayed that first time, because I'm like,
Mhm.
no, that's not it was supposed to
Yep.
go.
Right.
I never trusted him. I was always like, no,
No.
he's bad. He's never
Yeah.
gonna be a good guy. He can just like, he's interesting because I think he's the kind of person that if you weren't in his thoughts ever, you would think, oh my gosh, this guy is amazing. He does all these, like,
Right.
I think there you mentioned in one of your live streams, or in one of the many live streams you were on, about the scene where he goes onto the boat and he smells the slaves and he's like, ew, gross, you know, and then people are like, oh, he's getting emotional about seeing us here. And it's like, no, he just thinks you stink, you know, literally.
Right.
And so if you don't follow him, you're like, oh, he's actually a good guy. But because that we're in his mind, I'm like, no, I don't like you. I
His
don't like you.
internal monologues about Edda from the start are enough to really know that he's a despicable person. So,
Yeah.
Really,
And
Well,
really
that's why I
gross.
thought it was unpopular, because I kind of thought I never expected him to be redeemed. I kind of always thought, no, this is meant to be the bad guy, not necessarily the big bad, but one of the bad guys. I mean, he's nothing on Kyle, let's just say that. But like, that's why I kind of was like, why do I like him? He's like awful. Not
He is, and Kyle is just the worst. So I agree with you. I think I love Paragon as well, but I love what you said, Scott, and I agree. I think Wintro is one of the characters I've loved following the most. From that first scene to the very last scene of Wintro, I just have so much. I don't know. I just really love him, and there's scenes where he made me cry almost, and then there's scene where you're like, you're such an idiot, and then there's scenes where you're just like, don't you just like you want to slap him, but you also want to hug him. So
Yep. There is a villain in Rainwild. I'll be interested to see how you guys pick up on, named Hest, who is well, he's not awesome. So we'll see if you think he's as bad as Kyle or not. But I think he's
well, if anyone ever
in the
beats
discussion.
Regal, I'll be surprised.
Rigo, the worst.
Like,
I love Regal's ending though, but we're not talking about Farseer right now. So.
No.
I think that I liked Wintro, especially to see that in the beginning he's really thrown into the story. He was going to be a priest, and all of a sudden he needs to be a ship owner, or at least the heir of that ship. He's not good enough in the eyes of his father because he's weak, because he is that priest. And then shit hits the fan, basically. So, and he needs to deal with that as well. I think that, but I'm not entirely sure, but when the thing with Althea happened in the last book, I think that he doesn't believe her.
Correct.
And that's something that I found very
despicable.
enraging.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
See, I think Wintro is my least favorite character. Like in the whole series, and right from the beginning. I don't know why. I think in the first book, I found him very like he has that holier than thou attitude, and it really bugged me. So yeah.
I didn't get that, but I can understand seeing it that way. I really like his discussions with Vivacia, where he's basically trying to reassure her, I know this isn't your doing. I know that you need me here, and I don't want to be here. And a lot of that back and forth I thought was really, really good, because I thought it brought out the characters of both of them really nicely. But I definitely understand what you're saying, Sophie. I didn't get that in particular. But I can understand why you would.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, Wintro gets probably as much character growth and development and change as Malta does, but because his personality shifts away from that purity that we met, it tends to be overlooked, because it's almost like the character changes for the worse rather than the better.
Correct.
And when I have discussed that, people go, the influence of Kenneth, or the situation. And I'm like, yeah, they were written by the same author. So we're blaming Kenneth, even though it's the author. Whereas Robin Hobb gets it straight away from Malta. And I think that it's just remarkable that she can so immerse you in the world that we can blame another character for how this character evolves. And that is such a strength to her writing, that we see them as people, that they can influence each other. And I mean, that's just marvelous. As to Wintro not believing Althea, that touches into, and I don't know whether, Joanna, if you really want to spend a lot of time on that, but that whole situation, for me anyway, was so real in the way people reacted, because everybody's first instinct is, particularly with a person whose outward appearance is so giving, the natural reaction to go, no, that person would never, and
Correct.
end their willingness to listen. And that the truthfulness of that spoke really loudly to me. That really resonated. That is a reaction that happens. This is how people treat the situation, and it's how difficult it can be to go, it actually happened. Somebody believe me. And it made it incredibly poignant to read.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We can talk about that scene now if you want, since we're here, and I guess then that means we also talk about Althea at the same time. So that scene, I don't know, there, you told me if you need a trigger warning, I will give it to you. And Sophia, when she read it, said the same. And I was like, I think I'll be okay, because I kind of assumed what kind of trigger it could have been, because there was not a cute dog to die. So then I don't need any other trigger warnings, you know. So, but so I was really prepared because I knew the chapter it was going to be in. So when I read that chapter, I really detached myself from it completely. I actually just listened to it and was playing something on my phone because I just didn't want to pay attention to it very closely. So it didn't fully impact me emotionally, but I know some of you have been very impacted by it. So go ahead.
Yeah, I didn't know it was coming, and it did take me quite by surprise. Not in the sense of that Kenneth would do that, because I thought he would do that. I was just surprised that it actually happened, and it happened basically on page and described. So that was a little bit unexpected for me. But I mean, obviously I didn't like that happened, but the thing that bothered me most about it was the resolution of that particular storyline of Paragon taking her pain away from her. And I don't know, I felt a little bit uncomfortable with her writing that being the resolution to that, because in a way it feels almost dismissive to people who have unfortunately gone through either that experience or an experience that's very similar to it. So that's really the only thing that I particularly disliked about this trilogy was that whole storyline and the way that it was handled, if I'm being honest.
That makes sense.
That is the most common thing that I hear about it. And you do get more context later that explain that, but there's also an element of if you blink and miss it, there's very specifically Paragon states he's not taking the memory. He's not taking that event. He's taking the intensity of that pain. And I discussed it with my therapist because I'm that invested in this story. And I talked to her about it, and I was like, should I be conflicted with how that goes? Because I still am after all these years. And she sort of talked me through it and spoke out the context of what happened. And she ultimately said, from the sounds of it, all that's happened is in taking away that intensity, he's taken away the first couple of years after this event that is very difficult to heal through, and allowed her to get to a place where she can actually now heal. And now she's in a position where she can discuss it, she can integrate this into herself, and she can properly heal from this. So he's just fast-tracked her through 2 years of therapy. And I was like, oh, okay. And I've read it since then with that in mind, and I can see it. I'm like, yes, I get that. I can see that that's what he did. I can read it in the text that, yes, that's the point that I think Robin Hobb doesn't quite get through clearly, that it's just the intensity that she's taking away. She's out there that distance to be able to heal. And I was like, okay, I can live with that now. But as you say, Sophia, it can feel very dismissive if you aren't able to catch those tiny things that Robin Hobb's put in there. It does feel dismissive. It does feel like it's just been swept under the rug, and we don't have to worry about that for Althea now. She can just go forward with her life. She does still have to deal with it. So, I think that's interesting.
Eileen, Scott, do you have anything to add about this specific?
Not in particular, other than it being some of the most uncomfortable pages I've ever read, ever. And I don't enjoy seeing bad things happen to Althea, especially that bad thing by that individual. And I don't, and it's the biggest issue I have with Wintro, obviously, is not believing his aunt. I thought was absolutely ridiculous and horrible. So beyond that, I tend to, and this is terrible, but I tend to blank a lot of that out because I just don't want those memories. So I'm not looking forward to when I have to revisit them on this reread. So.
Isn't the first person that believes her the satrap's ex-companion or something?
Cyrilla? Is it
Cyrilla.
Cyrilla or is it Etta? I can't remember.
I thought it was Etta.
Oh, it's Etta. Okay, okay.
Yeah.
I don't remember.
Etta believes her.
Yeah.
Which Cyrilla also has to deal with that type of assaults in the story. Which
And
is
it's the fact
also
that
awful.
Etta believes her that makes Wintro finally turns around.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think there's some,
and part of it too is it escalates throughout the series. You start hearing about assaults to the people and backstories, and then you've got you get Cyrilla, but that's off page, and there's almost a situation where Robin Hobb's gone, "We're okay with that. Okay, let's make it worse," and we get what happens to Cyrilla, and okay, you're still okay with that. No, I want a reaction from you. And it just becomes more and more at the forefront, the assault that happens to women in these societies that just gets ignored and is treated as commonplace. And then she puts it right in your face and goes, no, I want a reaction from you to recognize how awful this is. And so thematically, as live ships generally, it's definitely a major theme that this is what happens when you take away women's agency. And there you go. I'm going to refresh again because clearly
it also
I still have a delay.
No, you're good. It also wasn't the first time Hobb had dealt with sexual assault in her books, because obviously Starling is the victim, again, off page, but we learn about it in Assassin's Quest. So definitely it's a theme that runs throughout and always hard to read for me. And I'm sure other people too.
Yes.
And I think we're so used to seeing this happen to women in fantasy books, which is something that people always criticize about. And here, the way Robin Hobb wrote it, it's so uncomfortable because they're two characters you've been following for 3,000 pages almost. And so it's not just exactly like, oh, off page, this happened to her in a brothel or something like that. It was literally this other character that we like and this character that we love, and it happens. And then you can't look away. You can't just say, oh, yeah, it doesn't happen or something. And then the fact that Wintro doesn't believe her, the fact that Etta does, but it's still like everything that happens, you can't look away. And I think that's why it feels so uncomfortable and why we talk about this, because we've never, ever talked about these types of scenes in other books. At least I haven't in any live show of books that I've been a part of. Where this situation happens, and here we have to, because it's so uncomfortable, and she really, like you were saying there, she confronts you with it and you can't look away. So
yeah, I
agree.
agree.
A question for Derry.
When
did you read this trilogy for the first time? How long ago? And do you think that people's reaction to it now, reading it the first time now, is different to the way people reacted to it then?
I think
I first read it in 2001, and I've been reading it pretty much annually since. Sorry, and
you're good. We can hear you.
I didn't have a lot of internet connectivity with a community at the time. And when I did finally find BookTube, I have found that to be quite surprising, the level of vehemence in new readers about it. I mean, it's satisfying because I want that reaction to that scene, but it's younger readers particularly are very affronted by it. And I find it difficult to explain to them that it really wasn't that long ago in our own world where this was normal, that this was expected, this was a woman's place, and that their affront is great. Yay, all for women's agency, but it takes such a little amount of misuse of power to take that away. And so, yes, reactions, I think, have very much changed around that scene. And I think it's a great change, because I think that's what Robin Hobb was aiming for. She wanted this affront. She wanted this disgust. She wanted this anger. And I kind of like that that's what she's getting from it.
Yeah, I agree. I also think that the reason that it's so hard hitting is like you have multiple facets here. First of all, Robin Hobb is an incredible character-driven author, so you feel very invested in Althea. It happens in the last book. So of course, by that time, you do have a connection with her. But there's one other scene in a different book, Daughter of the Forest, where something similar happens. It's just as graphic. But there, the people who do it are people that you don't know. While here, it's a character that you've been with for multiple books as well. And of course, if you already thought that he was unredeemable, then it might not be as hard hitting. But I thought that he was going to have that redemption arc. So it's not only Althea's life that gets changed in, of course, a horrible way, but it's also Kenneth, who, for me, it was like, why? This is something that I was not expecting. And then you have the reactions of Winthrop, which is also a character that I have come to love. And now he is also disappointing me. And then you have Etta, who believes her, but like somebody says in the chat, Etta still treats Althea with not a lot of respect or love. She doesn't really give her time to heal, which I also think says something about Etta and how she is a survivor. Often people who are survivors want to have that distance. They don't want to feel for you because that means that their own wounds are being opened up. So we have a lot of characters that we've come to love, and with all of them, this event changes something. And of course, the most for Althea, but also all of these others. And that's something that does not often happen when you have this in a different book, where it's only the main character that gets altered, but not everybody else.
I agree.
That's a great point.
Yeah. I think the psychology of Kenneth is really interesting here as well, because I can't remember whether this actually was explained in the book or whether this was something that you and I discussed, Joanna, because we buddy read this one as well, and we were doing all of these discussions at the same time as reading the book. But it's like, or maybe it's Vivacious says it to, I don't know. Anyway, the whole thing about Kenneth is really just partially doing this to get back power from the things that happened to him in his childhood. And that's just like, it just adds this whole other level of nuance that is just so interesting. Awful, but interesting, because that is a thing. So I have done various, I'm a lawyer for anybody who doesn't know, and I've done various work in various different areas, and it is quite typical for individuals who have been abused in their childhood to then go on to have either inappropriate relationships later in life, or to go to the extremes that Kenneth does here in this scene. And I think that it adds that sense of reality, I feel like, that Hobb is just so good at doing. Even in a fantasy world, it's still believable, and in this instance in an awful way.
It's what ties most violent crime together, right? They either have an abusive childhood and or cruelty to animals,
You're right,
those types of things.
And I think it's...
You can go.
Yeah. No, you're right.
Yeah.
And it also goes into the full talking bits in Farseer that the cycle. He talks about how the world is just going to keep going through the same things, and it's going to just get worse and worse and worse until you do something actively to change it. And so you're seeing these cycles of abuse, and you're seeing these cycles of poor parenting, and you're seeing cycles of betrayals, and you're seeing cycles of all of these negative behaviors. And it takes somebody to stick a stone in the rut for the wagon wheel to jump out of it. And that's kind of the whole point. Is again, we're touching on themes rather than story, but it all ties in together. All of these themes just keep kind of floating around and tying into each other. And I think that's just another one, that cycles of abuse are real, and they inflict more abuse in later generations. And that's valid, you know, and it's not an excuse, but it's valid.
Right. it's another really good reveal in the story that Kenneth was a bloodluck, and he had a
Yeah.
very difficult childhood, and he was abused by the pirate. Was it Egret, or I can't remember the dude's name? And how that all ties together, I thought was, yeah. So that all is very, very interestingly done as well. And obviously the monstrous things that were done to him, he's become the monster, as is too often the case. So
did
Isn't that what
anybody
his-
see that coming?
Him being a Ludluck?
I did
'Cause I
not.
didn't.
Not the first. I mean, I read it the first time too long ago to remember, but I remember being blown away by it. So,
Yeah.
and I also know
Yeah.
how I read. So usually I need to be told specifically this is what it is. So I'm sure I didn't
Yeah.
see it coming. But yeah.
So here's still just a comment that it's a two comments. So a pivotal incident for me, this the thing which changes every scene. There was a scene before Tintaglia comes, and they all sit and discuss. Winter became leader and was telling everyone what to do. Everyone interrupted him, and he was okay with it. But when Althea wanted to talk, he won't let her talk. And these were all very small triggering things. And yeah, I
Yep.
can see that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it just shows how much of an impact Kenneth has had on Wintro, because
Yeah.
if
Right.
Wintro had been put in that same situation at the beginning of book one, I think we could probably all agree that his reaction would have been totally different to the way that it was at the end of book
Oh, yeah.
three.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes.
And this is why I think it's so amazing that I think Robin Hobb is just amazing at writing characters, because look how long we've been talking about this, and nobody's here saying Kenneth is the worst despicable human being in the world and everything. It's because what we were saying, there's so much nuance to everything, and there's nuance to Wintro, there's nuance to just everyone. And I think that when I read the part about Paragon and Kenneth and their story, it was very emotional for me, because I thought, well, I was emotionally distraught for Paragon, to be honest,
Mhm.
because I thought you could really tell off the page this ship was in pain, you know,
Mhm.
and I felt it. I felt this pain, and when at the end Edda is pregnant with a boy that she's gonna name Paragon. Am I making this up?
Mhm.
Did I dream this?
No,
No,
you
this is correct.
No,
Okay.
that's right. That's right.
Okay, it could have
You
been a
didn't
dream.
dream it, it happened.
It happened. Okay. I thought, oh my god, like that scene, finding out that she was gonna have this child named I was like, it really hit me. It really hit me. Derry, you were gonna say something.
I want to say that I've literally just read the chapter where Althea cites Vivacia and Kenneth cites Paragon, and Kenneth's reaction to seeing Paragon had me in tears, because he's suddenly struck by the fact that Paragon knows him, and Paragon would be happy for him, and Paragon would be proud of him, and he has this rush of wanting that experience of somebody to truly grasp how far he's come, and that sense of wanting that connection. And I was just beside myself. I was like, oh, because that is what's left of that little boy, of wanting his best friend to be happy with him. And I was like, and I'm thinking, I know what Kenneth is. I know what he's about to do. And I can have this really emotional reaction for him in this moment, because Hobb's written him with this nuance, with all of this depth. And okay, I've got the context from much later that gives you the ability to see that, but the fact that I can have that at all, knowing the monster that Kenneth is just incredible writing, as far as I'm concerned. Just incredible writing.
For sure.
That's another one of those moments where he had the opportunity to redeem himself. He could have decided there that he was going to turn it all around, and then oh, let me quite literally burn it to the ground instead.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you still want to say something else about Althea? Because there were like almost 3,000 pages of her where this didn't happen to her. So her and Brashen maybe. Yes, this is it though. Like you end up kind of with this, and it kind of defines the ending of her story. But there was so much more to her.
Exactly. Yeah. That's the thing I don't like about it. I think the most is that there was so much more to Althea than that. But that's the thing that's going to stick with me from this series more than anything else, I think.
Makes sense.
But in terms of Althea, I did find myself getting frustrated with her throughout the series, because I was like, you know, your life does not have to be defined by whether or not you are captain of the Vivacia. Just like, I understand why it was so important to her, but I also just really wanted for her to like escape from that a little bit and be her own person. So I was really glad that she did actually end up there at the end, despite the way that happened.
Yeah, for me, it's just somebody says that it's the most misogynist finales that I have read, and it's been a while. So I don't really know if we really see that Althea is actually happy with her fate, or that she's more resigned to this might be the safe way for me to choose. This might be a way that I must learn to be happy with this, which might not be the perfect ending for her, but I do think that it's realistic. I don't think that how Winthrop treats her or how other people treat her is okay, but I also think that it is fitting for that world where nobody here is the hero, nobody is perfect. So even though it's annoying, it fits.
Yeah. I kind of like the
push
relationship.
back on the misogyny
I'll go
in
for it.
that. Sorry, Scott.
No, you're good.
Because Etta ends up being the person, if you like, who takes on the Pirate Isles. And yes, Althea takes a secondary role, as it were, to Brashen. But we do establish throughout the book that she's very entitled, she's spoiled, she doesn't really grasp a lot of the seriousness of what she's doing. She's remarkably like Malta to a certain extent. And while she proves herself as a sailor, she also starts to recognize that she's not a very good captain. She can't distance herself the way that needs to happen. And we also learn that Brashen actually is a really good captain. So I don't see it as misogyny that that's how she ends up, accepting the fact that actually being second to Brashen on the ship that they do actually both love is actually, it's where she kind of belongs. That's the role that she can achieve. And Etta being the queen, of the Pirate Isles. Hello, you can't get any stronger than that. Malta is very much raised to a position of power rather, and so are Kefria and Ron. So I really push back against that. I don't feel that that's a misogynist ending at all. And we do come back to some of these characters later, so you will get sort of epilogue bits for some of them. So
I really like the relationship between Brashen and Althea and how that builds over the series. So I'm happy they ended up together. I just today read the part where he's kind of stitching her up and they're together for the first time, and I love that whole sequence. So just the care that he has for her and that kind of stuff, and she returns it and says this can only happen once, and obviously it's not going to just happen once, and so I really like the relationship. So I'm glad they wound up together.
There was a part, right, because of my reading slump and everything that happened in my life between March and now, I kind of forgot what happened in Matship for a little bit, like details. But isn't there a part of Matship where she's potentially going to be with Greg Tenira?
Yeah, they're trying to set that up, but it never quite happens.
It never quite happens.
Yeah.
Exactly, because I was like, no, her and Brashen, there's a chemistry on the page. Like, this cannot happen. She cannot end up with this other dude. So yeah, I agree with you.
But speaking of the Teniras, Ophelia is actually my favorite live ship. So I love Ophelia. I don't know why, but she's just my favorite of the three. So
while we're on the subject of the live ships, can we discuss what is probably the second most depressing thing about this series, which is that the live ships are dead dragons? I mean, come on, Hobb, what are you trying to do here?
I was going to bring this topic up eventually, yes. Because
sorry.
No, it's perfect, because I really I wanted to talk about some of the characters, but this is like something that I really want to talk about, is this bit of like lore and history of the world. And so, because I was so confused for most of the book, I was like, so we have the serpents, and then we have dragons, And then when you're like, wait, so are the serpents the dragons? And then when you find out what they are, and you're like, but this is terrible. This is sad. This is really depressing.
Yeah.
And especially because you see when the ships realize what they are, you see them being like, we're not okay with this.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
that
it's
was
a mess. It's a mess.
Yeah.
Just a hot mess. And I think it makes me suspicious about the rest of the trilogies and quartet in the Elderling series, because we had all of a sudden dragons in Farseer, and then all of a sudden dragons in Liveship. So I'm like, I see what you're doing here, Hobb, and I don't like it. I don't like it.
I love dragons, so I like it, but I get it. I understand why that would be.
No, I like dragons. I don't like what she's doing to the dragons.
You don't like the pain that comes. Yeah, it's like her and George love dragons, but they don't love dragons. You know, it's like we love them, but we will make them suffer.
They're part of the world. They get to suffer along with everybody else.
No. Just like Nosy and Night Eyes, they should never have to suffer. I need to see you later. No,
If only that were true.
I know. So I'm very curious to see, because I was also very confused at the end of Assassin's Quest with the dragons. So I thought, okay, so are they the Elderlings? Are the dragons the Elderlings? Are these stone dragons the dragons?
I'll say I didn't really understand what Elderlings were until I read Rainwild Chronicles. There are hints of it before that, but I couldn't have told you very well what an Elderling was until I read Rainwild Chronicles.
Yes.
So an Elderling is not a dragon, I'll tell you that. But beyond that, I'll let you kind of figure it out yourself.
That far I've gotten. I have a feeling they're a people, but I'm not. I guess we'll see with Rainwilds.
Yes.
A lot of people dislike the Rainwild Chronicles. There's a lot of stuff in there that I really, really enjoyed. And particularly with the final two books, they're some of my favorite books in the series. So I look forward to you checking them out after you get Tawny Man done. But yeah,
so
you'll get a lot more.
Tawny Man, right?
Yeah, Rainwilds is after Tawny Man.
The quartet's after Tawny Man. Yep.
Yeah. I definitely recommend a break between Tawny Man and the live ships. You need time to come down from the high of that finale to be able to accept the beginning of live ships for what it is, because it's much. It's the pace of it is much. It's very different. You're rebooting essentially. I want to go back to what we were talking about just before my internet completely froze on me about the live ships and the dragons and the cocoons and the concept that these awful things happening and how tragic that story is for the live ships. And again, it goes back to the themes that she's very much talking about, where in Farseer you had the forged ones, and Fall talks about how when you make the value of life less than anything, what does that do? It makes slaves of all of us. And then we get this really overt thread of slavery in live ships, and then we get this very in your face, statement that you're making dragons slaves by making them ships. And so there's this entire thread around what do you do when you recognize the evil of it? How do you change that? How do you evolve your economy away from slavery? And that's a very deliberate thing, I think, that she's put on page, where she's like, no, question the facts that you've captured, you've chained a sentient being into service, and how wrong that is. In the same way as she confronted us with sexual assault, she's confronting us with slavery, and she's going, look at the value of human life, look at the value of sentient life, and do you have the right to in any way take that away from somebody? And that continues. That's a really strong thread all the way through, the value of agency and the value of freedom, which I think is just done so beautifully. And that's what I wanted to add around that.
The second you said the thing about dragons being slaves, I couldn't stop myself. So I heard Daenerys in High Valyrian in my head saying the dragon is not a slave. So
Exactly.
George and her, they should just, write the same.
Yeah.
Maybe she should
Mhm.
just write the last Game of Thrones book.
She's
the
one
last-
of the few people that I
Really
think could.
good interview
Yeah,
with the two of them together.
yeah, she
Yeah.
could. But then again,
Mhm.
then like there's no, like you already know it's not going to end well and it's going to be sad. But if Robin Hobb were to finish this series, it would be
Yeah,
buckets.
there's no hope.
No, it would be buckets of water every like.
It
just
would
coming out
also
of
be
it.
very, very satisfying. We know this.
Yeah.
It would be incredibly satisfying.
I am
Mhm.
extremely curious because I think I heard, and this is a bit side note from live ships, but I think I've heard that she was supposed to finish with Tawny Man, right?
I think
and
that was the
then she
original
decided,
plan.
Yeah. That was the
okay, so
planned
the ending of Tawny Man is gonna be, oh God, I hope Nidus is gonna be. Okay, I can't.
It's
handle
an
it.
event. It's getting there is going to be amazing. But that's what makes live ships, not live ships, it's what gives Rainwild Chronicles, I think, the reputation it has as being somehow less. It's just that
Yep.
it's not this planned pinnacle of an enormous story. It's the beginning of a new bit. So you have to kind of give yourself a moment after Tawny Man to go, oh, okay, happened, right. Okay, let's start with a new bit instead of assuming it's just a continuation and suddenly there's this massive drop, because that
Mhm.
really, really throws readers, and I think it doesn't help if you're not aware
Mhm.
that that's how it was.
Yes,
To be honest,
I
I'm
agree.
not too worried about Rainwild because most people like Liveship better than Farseer, and I like Farseer better than Liveship. So I'm like, do you know what? My opinions never fit with the mold anyway, so it'll be fine.
I think that when I read Rainwild, everybody was telling me that they didn't like it, that I was going to DNF it, that they
And there are
just
people that
completely
Rainwild's is their favourite.
ignored
Well,
that one.
not quite everybody, Yolene. I never said anything bad about
That's
it.
true. That's true. But I did manage my expectations because of that. So I was going in like, oh, it might be fine, but not good. And it was still great. It's not the
Mhm.
same level as everything else that she has written,
No,
but
it's not.
overall, it was still 4 to 5 stars, some of them.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So manage your expectations. Don't expect the same things like Liveship Traders or like Tawny Man, because it's a little bit less, but it's still Robin Hobb. It's still going
Yeah.
to
Mhm.
be
Yeah.
close to excellence.
Yeah, is she capable of writing something bad? That's the question. Cool. So who didn't we talk about yet? We didn't talk about Kefria at all.
Hmm.
Kefria and Ronica, we didn't talk about them at all. I don't know if you want to add anything about their characters and their character arcs. There we go.
I-
The F's were
I
open,
think-
sorry.
Kefria has it pretty rough. It's hard to read, especially the early stuff where she's just sort of being ordered around by a guy that we all hate, and she is devoted to him and is trying to do her best and kind of be led by the guy that we all hate. But I think slowly, kind of over time, even as early as Ship of Magic, she starts to get some agency, and she starts to kind of take back over a little bit of the books of the family and that kind of stuff. So she's not my favorite character to follow, but I do like a lot of what happens during her arc. I'll just say it that way.
Mhm.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it's also difficult for her because, well, you want to be sympathetic, but it's difficult because she gives so much towards Kyle, and she's fine just being housewife, letting him deal with it. But then the death of her father happens, and you can see how she starts thinking, wait, he's not exactly doing what I thought he would do. And she
Mhm.
still tries to see everything that he does in a different light. Like maybe he means this. Oh, I think that there's a certain scene that he brings her flowers or something like that. And for him, it's quite easily that's something that keeps the wife happy. It's very dismissive. While she tries to see it as like this huge gesture. So because you see those two sides, you do feel sorry for her. And then when she tries to take some more agency, it is kind of refreshing to see that, but sometimes it takes too long for the
Mhm.
reader. While if you imagine that that's her life, that's the father of her children, of course it's not going to happen in 5 seconds.
I agree.
Yeah, you should not be watching this with the spoilers.
Oh no.
Maybe he's watching with the sound off.
Yeah. Oh Lord. Well, You're spoiled now,
Hopefully
so
he'll forget.
he knew what was happening. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think what you just said, Yulene, with the flowers, and you think, what you just said. Sorry, that reminds me of Kenneth and Etta, where she's like, "Oh, this is so great, and he's so nice," and you're like, "No, he's not. This is not his intention behind it." So it's just why Kyle is just the worst. I think when he gets
Yeah.
thrown onto that island, I'm like, I'm so glad that we are rid of him, but at the same time, I'm like, but I kind of miss hating him so much.
Oh, I do not miss hating him.
Yeah, but you don't hate him as much as Regal. That's
Oh
I think
no, no one will ever be as hateable as Regal.
I do.
Ugh,
Regal is the worst.
hate with a fiery passion.
Yeah, when she read Assassin's Quest, she's like, I hate him. I need him to die.
I'm kind of glad. I'm
Did we miss
kind
any
of glad
great
that you hate
characters?
Regal so much, because that's the joy I have in hating Kyle. I come back to Kefria for a minute about really kind of how much blanket that she seems, and point out Kyle is at the heart of that for a reason, in that he never makes her establish her own household. They've been married a long time. They've got 3 children. She's never left her mother's house. She's never been in a position to run a household. She's never had to make decisions. And he wanted to keep her in that role. He didn't want her to have agency. He wanted her looked after so that he made the decisions. And so when we finally see her get some agency, it's when she's out of her mother's house and she's in the Rain Wilds, and suddenly she is actually a mother to her children. She has to make the decisions. And that's when she starts to question who she is, when she's not a wife and she's not a daughter. And suddenly she sees herself as a separate individual. And the quality of that writing, I think, is astonishing, because it's not overtly stated. Nobody says, oh, well, of course she behaves like a child to some degree because she still lives with her mother, who makes all the decisions. But it's just there in her character, because she lives with her mother and her mother makes all the decisions. And because her mother's fully capable, doesn't even think of giving her daughter things to be in charge of. Just character writing. Just she's the queen. No one can convince me otherwise.
It's easier for Ronica to do everything than to teach Kefria how to do anything. And then that passes down to Malta at the same time. So it's just that cycle of not teaching people how to be an adult. And so nobody is. So
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's interesting as well how we can so clearly see from reading what's going on inside Kefria's head that she's lying to herself, but she can't see that she's lying to herself because she's so in it. I think that's part of what's so interesting about having so many different character perspectives in this book. Like, a lot of books are sort of fantasy books that are multi-perspective, but there's so many here, and it gives way to so much interesting kind of insight and conversation, I feel like.
Agree.
I was wondering,
go for it.
Just if anybody enjoyed the interludes with the sea snakes, because I didn't. Up until the point that I realized.
I was just confused.
I was so confused. I didn't like or dislike them. I was just like, I'm sorry, what?
And I was like, who the hell is she who remembers what's happening?
So one thing I do remember from because I read this initially like 20 years ago, and one thing I do remember from my first read is I just need to trust her, because I remembered how much I enjoyed the interlude in Farseer. So I'm like, there has to be something to this. I don't get it right now, but I will. And I just have to just work with it, and eventually it'll get there, and I think it did. So so they never bothered me, but at the same time, it's also not my favorite thing in the story. I would rather be following the people, but it was more a matter of trusting Hobb than anything else for me.
Yeah. Bad pun coming in. You were the one who remembered to trust her.
Very good.
Moving on. Sometimes I have dad jokes. It's good.
I like it.
But I will say the confusion reigned, though. Sorry, Sophia. Go for it.
No, you go ahead. I'll ask later.
I was just saying I was freaking confused the whole time, so I was like, okay. Wait, didn't they also eat each other at some point? Like a serpent eating a serpent. I was like, is this like
to make sure the memories pass on, as I recall. You got to make sure those memories pass on.
Yeah. All right.
So my
Sophia, go.
question was about what is Malta's younger brother's name? I can't remember.
Selden.
Yeah.
Selden, yes. Okay. So when Selden starts talking with the dragons, and of course Rain and Malta are both doing the same thing. Joanna, you said you thought that was the wit. I didn't think it was the wit, and I don't know whether this is getting too much into Farseer, but where are you all at with this? Because I'm not convinced.
My theory is that the Kefri's children, so Selden, Wintro, and Malta, they all have the wits. This is my theory that I was discussing with Sophia, but I'm very glad to hear. Don't spoil us, but what was your theory at this point, if you had one?
I don't know that I had one. I don't think it's the wit, but I guess I don't know for sure. But I would defer to Derry because she's read it more than the rest of us combined.
Maybe they think we're idiots, Sophia. They're like, you two are no.
I tend no, you're idiots, not at all. Because there's so much happening that to try and get everything in your first read is almost impossible. And I always recommend at least one reread because it's like reading a whole new story when you've got context. But the relationship with the dragon, I very much felt more like skill than wit, in the way that Rain talks about the pressure on his mind and leaving his body when he goes to try and connect with Malta and those kind of things. But I will also say with Selden and the way he talks to Tintaglia, when he's so absolutely poetic and dramatic and oh lovely one and queen of the skies, and think about the way that Kennett talked to Vivacia at the beginning. That's how he spoke to Vivacia, my lovely lady, my queen of the seas, and how quickly that made her want to be part of that relationship. And I think that was very subtle because he's treating her, however unknowingly, he's giving her that praise that the dragon feeds on. And so when we see the emergence of Bolt, that's been really fed by this admiration by Kennett. And it's all just really subtly done. It's all just sort of sprinkled in there, and it ties together incredibly well that he's been treating her with this, I don't know, adoration that we see in Selden for Tintaglia, and how effective that is in manipulating the dragon. So there's so many layers to the story that you can take just about any thread you like and find things that connect to it. It's insane. A reread, absolutely worth it.
I have a question.
Can confirm. Yeah.
I have a question for those of you who've read it multiple times and or who have a better memory than I do. At the very beginning of Ship of Magic, when we meet Wintro for the first time, isn't he like painting dragons in glass or something like that? There's something with dragons in stained glass, isn't there?
I remember the stained glass. I don't remember the dragons, but they're probably.
He's making a stained glass window, and the dragon and a serpent come into the picture. And when he comes out of his creative trance, his mentor, Bina somebody or other, Benderl, somebody, he says, "I noticed they're there again." So there's immediately a connection between Wintro, dragons and serpents as pre-existing everything that happens in the story. Wintro has a profound connection that completely non-consciously, when he's in a creative trance, a dragon and a serpent appear, and that's in that first scene that we meet Wintro. He's creating that. So you're right, that is that first scene with him.
Okay. See, and this is why that's why my theory emerged, where I was like, there's something. He has to have either the skill or the wit. I thought the wit because of animals, you know. Does a dragon count as a pet? I don't know. But so because I thought, how could this person have this this connection, this understanding of something where clearly we knew this was going to be about dragons and serpents because of the covers. So I knew that those creatures would come back. I didn't know how, but yeah, that really it connected. Like it felt really important that we had that scene as an opening scene for Wintro, even though we had no clue what it actually meant. I probably still don't know what it means until maybe later on. But yeah, it's fine. It really stuck with me since I read it.
I will have to go back and reread it because I didn't remember that it was dragons. So that's
Yeah.
me not reading carefully once again. Good times.
Do you think
There's
the
just
serpents
so
is killing
much
out
in
the
there,
intro?
and this is why I read it so much. The serpents are definitely influencing people. If you look, there's a scene where Kyle, when he has an outburst against Winch, is a little bit far, and he has him up against the railing by the throat, and he's so enraged that he's going to throw Wintro off the side of the ship. But when you read it closely, there's a serpent in the water beside him, looking at him and demanding food. So there's definitely an influence, a field of some kind. Like serpents can definitely influence human beings into behaving a certain way. And you do see, once you see it once, you start to see it more. And that's, I think, was the most clearly written scene where if you were going to pick it up, that was going to be where you picked it up. But yeah, the serpents are definitely, because they're dragons, ultimately. They have much of the same skill. But yeah.
Skill. Yeah. That's so interesting. I want to reread it already. But at first we need to finish and then start the
Yeah,
reading.
keep going.
Yes.
Keep going.
Anything else about Liveship Traders or specific characters or maybe history, world lore? Anything you want to touch upon that we haven't talked about yet?
I think really just the scene for me we didn't hit on yet, and one of the reasons
Sorry.
Oh, sorry, Deary. Go ahead.
I think her name is go for it, Scott.
The delay is doing my head in.
Oh, there we go. We will manage.
We haven't touched at all on the people of the Rain Wilds, where we meet Yanni Kupris, and we obviously spend quite a lot of time with Rain, and how you felt about the fact that they had built live ships from these wizardwood logs, and as we learn through the live ships, Yanni knew, so clearly the heads of that family knew at some point that they were killing a creature to provide these ships. And the underground city and the changes that the Rainwilders undergo, and how did you feel around all of those? Because I'm always fascinated to hear how people, their first sort of ideas and concepts around that.
I think for me, when we're first introduced to, is it Festru that meets with Ronica, and the payment has to be in blood or gold, and we learn about these generational type of deals that they had, where if you can't pay in gold a certain number of pieces or links or whatever it is, you have to give a child basically to a marriage pact. And for me, that was a really interesting thing to show just how valuable these live ships are, that people are still paying for them generations later. And people that had nothing to do with the original deal, several generations down the line, potentially are on the hook for it. I thought that was really, really super interesting. And of course, the Rain Wilds themselves, I think, are a super fascinating setting. So I really like that later in the series too.
Yeah, see, because all the books are out, I know that the Rainwild Chronicles are coming up. So I haven't settled on my feelings about the whole situation, because I feel like we're going to come back to it and there's going to be a lot more on all of that in probably the Rainwild Quartet. So my jury is out, as it were, on these particular issues, I think.
Yeah, I think for me it's just very difficult to talk about it because I read Rain Wilds. So I don't know how I thought about it after Liveship Traders. I think that I was just, because I didn't really notice that some of the older generation actually knew that they were killing these dragons or these potential dragons. So I more saw it in a way of how dangerous it can be to meddle with things that you don't really understand. And then you find yourself in a situation where the damage is done, and
Sure.
how do we fix this? So I found it just an interesting experience that way, where Rain, for example, he knows that there's something, he can hear that, well, memory would, or that something is there, but nobody really believes him, or nobody wants to believe him. And I
Right.
found that interesting. And then also, of course, it just enriches the world that much more, because you know that you have the 6 duchies, and then of course you have this place, but you also have the Rain Wilds. So it makes the world much more realistic, that you have these different types, and that also not only do we have different climate and all of that, but also the different politics and how they need to try to live together. And sometimes you do have that exchange, but people don't really understand each other, and especially the younger generations, because it's that new pact. Why do I need to pay for this? Why is this important to me? And you can also see them understanding that better as the trilogy progresses. Something that I also found, and I don't think that we have that answer in Liveship Traders, is why these children have malformations, how that happens, and why
Yes.
people keep living there. Why don't
Sure.
you just leave?
Yeah. Do we get answers to this? Because this is the thing that I was the most. Okay, I mean, when you said the politics, because I love political fantasy, so that was my first thing. I was like, politics, come on, because that's something I still want to talk about before we leave. It's the Bingtown politics at the very end, but never mind now. So politics was super interesting, but I was like, but what? Why do they look different? What's happening here? And exactly what you said. Why does nobody leave? So, yeah, super interesting. And but as Sophia said though, since I do know there's more coming, I'm still waiting to see. But of course, I mean, when you find out that they know that they're killing baby dragons, you're like, I do not like you, but I will wait. Yeah. Scott, you had a scene that we didn't touch upon that you want to talk about.
Oh, I was just going to say one of the reasons I like Wintro so much overall is kind of the scene where he knows he has to lose the finger. And, he goes to his dad and is like, this is going to happen. You should do it. And his dad refuses because Kyle's a coward at his base, along with being awful. And just the way that Wintro handles that whole thing and takes all of the pain and kind of goes into himself as sort of a trance, I guess. So using some of those things he learned in the monastery, I think, are pretty valuable there. I thought that whole thing was good, and he kind of offers his dad the finger and says this will never have Saw's ring on it. And of course, Kyle again refuses it, and Vivacia ends up with the finger and swallows it as kind of a token. I thought that whole sequence, I really love all of it. It's really, really good.
And there you have a difference, though, again, between Wintro and Kenneth, because we were saying that Wintro was so influenced by Kenneth, and how Wintro is okay with his pain and dealing with it and going through it, and Kenneth's like, nope, I'm not gonna do this. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, I also think that it's just interesting that Kyle thinks Wintro is weak because he is a priest, because he is compassionate. But then here you see that Kyle is not dealing with this, and Wintro, he just wants to go through it, and he wants to feel it all, and he wants to own it.
Isn't there like a scene in one of the first two books where they are fighting? In a like, why am I thinking of Brienne and the bear? I don't know, but it's like a scene like that. You know what I'm talking about?
That happens actually before the finger.
Yes.
There we go.
So they have their shore leave, and it's with a bear, and they want Wintro to go in. It was a bear. They wanted Wintro to go fight the bear or avoid the bear or whatever. And Wintro knows it's a setup and knows it's going to be bad, and he's smart enough to avoid it. But that's part of the reason why Kyle thinks he's such a coward, is because he didn't just do it and just, do something for the ship, even though it was obviously a setup. So that happens a couple chapters before the finger is lost in Ship of Magic.
But doesn't Wintro have like a super awesome comeback to that whole thing?
It's a
we can hear you.
Remember if Wintro had a comeback to that, but I was going to say that the toxic masculinity in Kyle is it's the other side to the frequent sexual assault that we see for the women, in that Kyle has so bought in to this is what a man should be, that he's not looking at the strengths in his son. We can see really clearly Winthrop is intelligent, he's well-spoken, he's courageous, he's incredibly brave. We see that little bit later when he takes his own finger. So he has all of these that are very manly, for want of a better word, but because he doesn't fit into Kyle's mold of what a man should be, the toxicity of that belief does so much damage to Winthrop and to the men around him. And I like that we get that as well, that we get the negative side when you get this gender split in behavior, that it's just as damaging to men. It's just as harmful to their interactions with each other, with their families. And it's a great way to show that being a man can look very different. You can have somebody who is very blokey, very manly, like Brashen, but he's very conscious of always being very respectful of the women in his life. He's incredibly conscious about consent. We see that in every scene he has with Althea. Then we see somebody like Ephron, who, I mean, okay, we only met him for a scene at the beginning, but he left a mark because he was a good man. And then we see Winthrop. We see all of these examples of different men. And Kyle is that one at the extreme to show us this is what that leads to when you really separate out the genders and have such defined roles. That's what you end up with. And I thought that was just, it's all there in subtext. It's all there in the writing. And it's amazing.
And she reinforces it later when she has Althea pretending to be a man to be able to prove that she's capable of everything that Kyle thinks that she can't do.
Right.
Yeah, I agree. I also really like this comment, which I agree. It's really interesting, and I love seeing all this because it's just so fascinating what she's done, what she's created, and how she developed those characters. And it's just everything makes sense. There's not a character moment where you think this doesn't make sense at all, or this is out of nowhere. And even the horrible moments or the sad moments are the moments where you would just wish they had reacted a bit differently. But it ultimately all makes sense and it's very nuanced, which is why I think we all love Hobb so much.
For sure.
So the last thing I wanted to touch upon, which I already kind of said, is the Bingtown politics at the very end, with the new traders and the original traders and everything.
Old Town traders, yeah.
Sorry?
Newtown and Old Town traders, wasn't it?
Yeah, there we go. What did you think about all those discussions at the end? They were also discussing slavery, which we've already talked about a bit earlier. So is there anything that you thought was interesting? Especially for those who have read it a few times.
It's been a while since my last read, but I think just the fact that all the factions have very different goals, they have very different things that they care about and want to achieve, makes a lot of that really interesting, because figuring out ways that will appease or at least make everybody semi-happy is not an easy thing to do. So I need to reread it. It's been a while, but I do remember finding that very intriguing, and particularly like the Old Town traders, you know, the power that they're used to wielding and they're used to having the final say on everything doesn't really work out in a situation where there's other factions that have different goals and different things they're trying to achieve. So I'm looking forward to rereading those bits of it. It's been a while, like I said, since I got back to them.
I think that's exactly what I thought was so fascinating, seeing these Old Town traders who were so used to having the power and the ultimate say, and then kind of having to realize, okay, we have to look at it in a different way and trade or just agree with these other people and come and sit around the table and have these discussions with other people and not just us. And also the freed slaves are like, and don't forget about us, we're also here.
Right.
So
I think I'll find...
Yeah, I will add with the politics that a lot of people get really confused as to what causes riots and who's organising what kidnapping of the satrap and what's behind that. And that can be very confusing because there's not just two sides. There's 3 or 4 different factions at play, and all of them, as you said, have very different goals. And it does take the entire trilogy for you to really get a sense of who was trying to achieve what. And when we get to the end and we see them forming this, essentially a government for their area, it's very much that sort of post-colonial stage that we see in real life, where people have moved in and gone, right, this is our place and we're here and we're in charge of it. We're the only ones here. That's only going to affect us. Fine. A new group arrives and doesn't have the same say. And it's the shift of, okay, we have to go back to that, where everybody who lives here gets a say. And that changing of a system to allow growth and to change is painful for any society to go through, but they've accepted its necessity and it's going to do it. And I liked that there's acknowledgement that the old traders, the Bingtown traders, can accept that they have to let go of being in charge of this region, because they're not the only people there anymore. And I appreciated that yes, the slaves get a voice, and yes, the 3 ships people get a voice, and everybody who lives here has a voice. That's important. I liked that.
I think I'll follow it better and be more engaged with it on a reread, because I feel like there's so much going on in so many different places in this book that I was just trying to wrap my head around just like a small portion of what was going on. So I think it'll be a bit like, you know, like Mistborn, for example. When I go back and reread Mistborn now, I'm like, oh, this and oh, that, and I didn't pick up on these things the first time around. I think it'll be the same with the Elderlings just in general. Reading the series again once I've finished it will add something.
For sure.
Yeah, I agree. I think that I definitely need to reread it, especially because I love politics and fantasy, but I'm most of all a character-driven reader. So what happened with the characters that we're close to, that's what I remembered. What happened to Bingtown, even though that's important, it's further away from those characters that we loved. So somehow that went to the back of my mind, and now I have to reread it. What I did really enjoy there was just the feeling of the privileged position that felt like all their power was taken away, even though they've just had 100%. And now we're going to divide it fairly. But it doesn't feel fair to them, because all that they feel is we have to give away stuff. We're not really improving here. Every other group is improving, and we're not. So I loved how that was shown, because it is, again, realistic. And you can also understand why a group like that would feel that way. Even though it's not correct, it's human nature.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. Cool. Well, is there anything else you want to mention before we close out this discussion on Liveship? I think we're good. Okay, cool. Well, Sophia and I are currently reading Tawny Man, so we will have a Tawny Man discussion maybe at the end of January or something like that. We'll see who can make it for that. So if you're willing to come back, I mean, you're always welcome to talk more Hobb. The more Hobb, the better. Am I right? So
that's true.
Thank you, Sophia, Jolien, Scott, and Derek for coming and for talking Hobb with me today. And thank you everyone who was in the chat, who popped in and watched it. And if you're watching this back, leave a dragon emoji in the comments, because it has never been more fitting than today. So thank you so much for coming in, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.